Today, I'm going to keep it modern. I'm making a cool bench with a floating top. Sometimes you have to let the imagination run wild, whether you're creating with a purpose or you're just creating. Thanks for joining me. I'm Glenn. Shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. More details on them later on. Be sure to check the video description for details about this build. Let's get started. So prior to this point, I've already cut the plywood down to a manageable size, but now I'm going to fine tune it and cut it down to the actual dimensions. And to do so, I'm going to do that over at the table saw. I'm going to use this digital angle finder, and I'll use this to set the blade to 45 degrees. And now that I know the blade is at the proper angle, let's go ahead and make some cuts. The final width of this bench is just over 22 inches. So my rough cut was around 23.5 to 24 inches. And without wasting too much material, I made the first pass, flipped the board around, and then made the final cut. Although I was able to get majority of the cuts done on the table saw, I still had to pull out the circular saw to get the short side. The bench has 2 sheets of plywood, and the bottom piece of ply has 45-degree cuts on all sides. Since the top is just a large rectangle, I'm gonna cut the top down as well with the circular saw and be sure to wrap it with tape so I can avoid tear outs when cutting across the grains. Now I did want to make sure that I had enough wood glue going along the perimeter of the plywood and also having a few strips going in the center as well. The plywood with the miter ends on them, this piece is going to be placed at the bottom. Now the next thing you'll want to do is just put a few clamps on one end of it, and this way you can go around and square it all up. Now the next thing is to grab a ton of clamps and put them on. You can also place this on a flat surface and place weight on top of it and allow enough time for the glue to dry. Now all the parts to the bench are double stacked plywood. So there are 4 pieces like this one, and I have 2 for each leg. So right now I'm marking out the section that I'm going to cut out, which will support the stretcher. So I found the middle of that, then I took the stretcher and marked that onto the plywood. I'm also going to use my bandsaw and also the jigsaw to remove this section. You'll also want to repeat this a second time for the other leg. For each leg, we're going to have 2 sheets of plywood per. One is going to be the untouched panel, and the other one's going to be a piece with the notched out section. Now the legs obviously is going to do majority of the supporting, so we want to make sure that the panels are secured and glued properly. And with the first one being done, I'll repeat the same step for the second one. And only one piece of the stretcher is going to have pocket hole screws in it, and this is going to be all of 4 screws, which is going to be in the entire build. We're going to ask a lot of this joint, so be sure to put enough wood glue in here and just flood this entire section. Now if you also notice, I've slid the wood in place, then I took a scrap piece of wood and put that in there just to make sure that I'm pinning the plywood to one side. And at this point you can go ahead and install the screws. And before we get too far, just go ahead and check for square inches, see that if everything is good, or if it's off by a little bit, I wouldn't be too concerned. There's a few things we could do to fine tune that. If you're off by a lot, you may want to check to make sure that the boards are butted up against each other. So far, everything's been coming together nicely. Just be sure to add wood glue and slide this piece into place. And the next thing we'll do is add clamps. If you don't have a ton of clamps, but you have a nail gun, you could also use a nail gun in this case to speed things up. Now I need to make 2 holes in the bench leg so I can support the top. To do so, I find the center from the stretcher to the end of the bench. Then I mark that onto a piece of scrap wood, which I could use as my template for drilling. Now you can absolutely use a drill for this, but a drill press just make quick work of this. And as you can see, I drilled both pieces at one time. This way I didn't have to worry about the pieces being off. I also marked number 1 and number 2 on the pieces because I'm going to identify that with each legs. And even though everything should be perfect, you just want to make sure that you just keep these pieces with each other. This way if something is off by a hair, you know you got the right one in the right place. First, I'm going to take a 1/2 inch bit and put a stop on it, and this way I can drill down into the pieces. Then I'm going to jump over to the next leg and do the same thing. Now I'm going to take the bottom and place that on the top while the top is upside down. Now I did notice one of my legs were turned in just a hair, so what I'm going to do is just find one corner on each side of the bench. Then I'm going to take this scrap wood, because I know this one is straight, and then I'm going to straighten that out on the top. And this is what I meant that you can fine tune this later on. So what we're going to do is drill the hole straight and force the legs into place. Now to drill these holes, I would highly recommend you use a bit with a collar on it. You could use tape, but the collar acts as a hard stop, and this won't let you go down any further than it's set to. You're also going to need a stick of 1/2-inch rod, and I'm going to cut those down into 4 small pieces. Now these pieces are going to be throwaways, but I needed those so I can line the top up with the bottom. Now on top of that, I also need to drill a couple holes in the stretcher. This was the only thing that I could think of, and it actually worked out well, so I don't have a problem with the process. I'm also going to use this dowel center as a way to mark the top. Now I could only find one of these dowel centers, so I'm going to have to do one hole at a time. So what I'm looking to do here is put the top down, allow that to sit all the way down on the legs, and at the same time it's going to hit the dowel center, mark the top, and then I'll know where to drill my hole. But of course I couldn't get there without a fight, and that's because one of my legs was off, so I had to work that into place. Because I only have one of the center marks, I have to lift the top off, move that from one hole to the other, and then put the top back on. And here are the points I've been working for. Now I can drill a hole down into the top the same depth as I did for the outer legs. Now these short metal rods are pretty useless at this point, so I'm going to do away with those, then drill the hole down a little deeper so that we have more of the rod down into the bottom. In total, I needed 6 rods, which was cut down to 5 inches. And rounding over the ends make it a lot easier to guide into the holes. So right now the bench look a little plain, and I wanted to add something else to it that would make it, pop a little more. I had a few ideas in mind, but I decided to settle on just putting 2 strips of the mahogany right into the top. I traced a piece of mahogany right on top of the plywood. There was no room for mistakes, so I had to set up a jig so that I can get this right on the first shot. The whole process of doing so was a bit time consuming, but it was well worth it in the end. It was a pretty simple jig. I just laid down 2 strips of wood, then I attached a cross piece going across the top. Now the piece of wood I'm using had this profile on it, as you can see. I was planning to cut that off so I can make the job a little simpler, but I decided to take on the challenge because I thought it would look cooler if I kept it that way. And since I'm using 2 of them, I decided to make them face each other. Now once I get to the middle section of the jig, it's going to become weaker, so I added this piece of wood, which would prevent the jig from flexing when I get near this section. To route this section out, I end up moving the jig 3 times. I took off a thin layer at a time, and I made multiple passes until I got down to the thickness of the wood. Now although you can route it out however you like, I focused on the outer lines first, then I worked my way back to the middle. And now that one is down, I'm going to focus on the second one, and I'm going to mark that about 4 1/4 inches away from the first one. I just repeat the same step I took for the first one, and I was able to get that routed in as well. Now I was pretty happy with the way this came out. Everything just fit nicely. The next step is to add some glue, snap the pieces in place, and let the glue set. And with the glue curing, it's the perfect time to go around and fill in all the voids with wood filler and also sand down the bench. And while I'm working on that, here's a quick word from today's sponsor. Ever want to create a beautiful website? Well, now you can using Squarespace, an all-in-one platform. There's nothing to install, patch, upgrade, ever. Simply choose a designer template that fits your style and begin your journey. And if you ever have any question, you can take advantage of their award-winning 24/7 customer support. Go to squarespace.com/DIY creators, and this will let them know I sent you. Sign up now for a free trial and get 10% off your first purchase. Now the open ends on the plywood was part of the design, and I don't want to cover those up, but I also want to make sure that I round over the ends to prevent the plywood from chipping or peeling. It was a slight round over. I simply didn't want to take the look or feel away from it. Since the mahogany inlays into the plywood, I marked both pieces at one time with a pencil, just basically scribbling over both of them, and when I'm sanding down, I know which one is higher than the other by just removing one material to erase the pencil mark. Now I did want to keep the contrast between the mahogany and also the plywood, so I decided not to stain any of it and leave it as it is and just add a clear coat on top of it. The polyacrylic seemed to be a great solution to put on a clear coat and also the final coat of your project. I ended up using 3 coats and light sand in between each. The steel bars are a bit dull and I wanted to clean those up and add a little bit of sheen to these. I used some sandpaper to take off the first layer of this rod. I may have picked up the one that had the label on it. The sandpaper wasn't taking it off, it was only gumming it up, so I decided to use some WD-40 to remove that. The drill really helped a ton and saved me a lot of manual labor and did a better job than I could by hand. I had some steel wool on hand and I used that for the final layer of sanding. It's looking a whole lot better than it did before, and at this point I'm just going to take some WD-40 and spray it on here as a way of polishing this. And here's a quick comparison of what it was before to what it is now. To raise the bench off the floor, I'm going to use some nail-in glide feet. There are many ways to adhere the metal rod into the wood. Being that I have some 2-part epoxy in a small portion, I'm going to use that. I actually had to mix another batch of epoxy because the one I was using, I wasn't moving fast enough and that became hard and unusable. I added epoxy in the holes on the bench and I decided to switch it up the way I did it the first time, put the top down and then slide the bench on top. I was so concerned with getting this on in a timely manner that I lost my train of thought. So I went crazy trying to get this on and I'm wondering, why won't this go all the way down? What's stopping it? And then I remembered that they don't go any further. So it was one of those silly moments where I kind of laughed at myself. So to wrap the bench up, I used some car wax to take off the sticky layer on it, put that on the entire bench, then I came back and just waxed it off with a microfiber rag. There's a great possibility I might have waxed this a little too much because it was so slippery, I was sliding on it.